is that they don't need to be overwhelmed by. And even, the 2% that attempted suicide, that'd be a tragedy for our community. So, although our percentages are great when you look at metrics, I think there's street data as opposed to, macro data that really shows that we need to reach every kid. And the reason that I came to a small school and enjoy working in a small school is I think we can know who those kids are if we provide the outlets for them to have a confidant in an adult space that they can talk to and work through some of the challenges. I really do think that 99% of the problems that students have, even though they might be out of their control, are solvable when it comes to their mental health. So, so that's, the first statistic. We want to continue on.
Sorry, the people at home can't hear us.
Oh,
So
But the microphones are moving, which when you're talking, so it's like something.
apparently neither on Zoom nor on Facebook.
Can I ask a question just to
please.
point here? In looking at this, is this survey set up so that you can select all 4 of those areas, or are you being asked to choose just one? So an individual
No.
can choose, I've had depressive symptoms, and I've considered suicide, and I've attempted, and
So I
I
think
made a
this,
plan, or that they can only choose one
no,
of
I think there's
those.
about 150 questions.
Okay.
And then the aggregate data
Right.
combines the student answers to come up with the profile.
Okay,
Okay, they can hear you now. Thank you.
So I guess we skipped the the really important part. But this
Wanna
is
go
the
back?
good news.
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah, we're gonna go back.
Can
Yeah.
you just present that slide again?
So, as I was saying, I think, our mental health statistics have really improved over time. This is the slide that kind of concerns me the most because as I was saying, we're a very small school. We have about 100 kids in a class, and every percentage that you see there is a student. So when we see that 13% of kids have depressive symptoms, that's a lunch table that I'm looking at every day in the senior CAF. And, those numbers have improved, which is fantastic. But I think that we can do some more. I think that the strategic decisions that we've made have improved that. And I think that the more we can build authentic relationships and outlets for kids who are struggling with mental health, both for circumstances that are under their control and circumstances that aren't, are things that we can address. I think we have the staffing to do that. I think the staffing changes that we've made have greatly improved that. And I think we're trending in the right direction. But, as I mentioned before, 2% of students attempting suicide, even though that's, 2% against 19% of the national average, that's 2 kids. That would be a tragedy for our community. And I don't want to see us go in that direction. So I think, the more we can continue to press this and make informed decisions using this data is important. So sleep and stress, I think you'll see a correlation between an increase in sleep. Obviously, COVID disrupted a lot of sleep patterns, but I think since we've come out of COVID and have been more regulated, the stress level at school has gone down, correlated with the sleep among students who's gone up, which is, I think, an important correlation. The next couple of slides are kind of self-destructive behavior. So eating and weight loss, we're trending in the right direction, but at the same time, the numbers are very low. So I think those are things that, as I mentioned, when we're talking about 5%, 2%, 3%, we're talking about the difference between 1 and 2 kids per grade level. So, I think those are things that if we know what's going on, we have the resources to put them in our care, put them in medical care. And I think the addition of our BRIGHT program, and particularly the addition of Bobby Collins as a social worker in that program, has made a tremendous impact on kids who have been in eating disorder programs and have been able to transition back to school in a much healthier place. We can go to the next one. Vaping, as I said, we see a little bit of spike this year. I think the data shows that a lot of kids are vaping flavors. there was a really high percentage in 2019 that dipped a little bit in COVID, dipped right afterwards, and has risen a little bit, but not substantially. And I think, one of the patterns that we'll see is that our female substance abuse is a little bit higher than our male substance abuse, and our female stress level is a little bit higher than our stress level. And John and I actually met today, and we met with Safe Harbor a couple of weeks ago to try to unpack what that is, if it's a feeling of perfectionism, if it's, some other factors that are going into, and really come up with ways to try to understand why our female population in particular is suffering more than our male population. Not that either are unimportant, or one is more important than the other. Alcohol has gone down over time. One of the things that we noticed in our early surveys was that drinking really started as sophomores. And I think that was due to a couple of things. I think it was our size. I think that it's the mix of our kids. I think it's our sports teams and some of the drinking that goes on and some of the team building activities. And, we have sophomores that are on varsity, and a lot of schools don't. Most sophomores are on JV. They're in with a different crowd. Now our sophomores are mixing with seniors. One of the things we did strategically was move our two things really. We expanded our freshman wellness class and really did a good job there of explaining drug use and the effects on performance and the effects on your psyche. The second thing was we tried to move our sophomore health class into first semester so that we targeted that class earlier. And I think that is a direct correlation with what we're seeing in improvements. Correlating that, we moved our senior health class second semester, which was more of a transition into college. So it's healthy relationships. It's, what do you do if you're at a party? What are your options? We've had some stories over the years of kids who are drinking in houses and a tragedy happens and they don't know what to do because they think they're going to be in trouble. Giving them those strategies and outlets to, call 911, no amount of trouble can affect, be the same as a person's life, but you need to do something. And we've seen some actual examples of that happening, which is great. Marijuana over time has been really steadily on the decline, which is fantastic. We're about half of the national average. Some of that is in vaping, some of it isn't, but the amount of times I can't even think of the last time we caught a kid in school. But, marijuana usage has been dramatically decreased, so we can continue on. And, I think a couple of things, the next two slides will kind of show it. The graphics are a little bit tough to see, but I think the split of the middle and the high schools administratively has been huge. I think it gave the middle school, and I was here before it happened, its own identity, its own resources. Adding a half guidance counselor at the high school allows for more authentic conversations with kids. Reconfiguring our guidance department to have a dedicated half school psychologist and a 1.5 adjustment counselor. The psychologist splits between those roles, and hiring Bobby and Bright has been a godsend. And what you'll see, and I need kind of my glasses, but what you see on the slides below is the results of our peer survey. And the peer survey is individual to kids, and it identified kids who are in our tier 1, which is most kids, tier 2, which needs some support, tier 3, which needs a lot of support. And it pinpoints those kids, and we can reach out to families ahead of time. So what we've seen over time is an increase in kids who are in tier 1, which is what we want, a decrease in tier 2, and a pretty significant decrease in tier 3. 2% or 3% is not a lot of kids when you're talking about 372 kids at the high school. So that correlates with an increase in their strengths, which is above, and a decrease in their challenges, which is their own kind of preventative measures like resilience and advocacy, self-advocacy and those types of things. So all of those things together, and if you just want to go to the next one, I don't think this is by accident. I think having the data from the peer survey, I think redesigning the sophomore and senior health classes, creating that ninth grade wellness class, which replaced a traditional gym class. Expanding our relationship with Safe Harbor, I cannot say enough about them. The level of student interest and student participation in Safe Harbor, when students drive substance abuse use, it makes an enormous difference because we can tell them all day as parents, we can tell them all day as teachers, but to have the kids advocating for themselves, and not just kids who are, Little House on the Prairie recreates, right? But who actually believe it and who are involved in a lot of other things, I think makes an enormous difference. We've incorporated a substance abuse awareness club. That group is down at CADCA right now, or some of that group is down at CADCA right now with Safe Harbor. I think the ability to expand our offerings down to the middle school, down to the elementary schools, and teach those kids, they really receive that message. I think, working up the chain with the senior center is going to be another thing that can really help us. And I think doing things like Challenge Day and the JPH Retreat Center, which we've done largely grant funded the last couple of years. This year we will pay for it ourselves, but collaborating with those groups and then collaborating with Challenge Success, which people are going to hear about pretty soon, has been an enormous help in helping us pinpoint what the achievement pressure and the different pressures that kids have are, and really getting good curriculum in place to address it and people in place to address it. There's just no substitute. I think we found this out from COVID for someone that your kid trusts. And if they're going through something and they know that they might not want to say it at home, but they can tell somebody at school, I really think this is life or death. And I think all of this is the foundation for good learning, which is what we're supposed to be doing. But I'm really happy with the way this is all kind of come together. And like I said, I couldn't say more about Safe Harbor. We started with kind of a ragtag, you can continue. We started kind of with a ragtag group of students, 6 or 7, and we're up to 50 plus. In a school of 370, that's a pretty substantial amount of students who are advocating for healthy behaviors. I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
Yeah, as the wellness department director, and I've taught the wellness class, the freshman wellness class since we started and created it. I just want to emphasize how important this data is because it's driven every curriculum decision we've ever made. The reason why we created freshman wellness was the biggest problem we had at that time. The Safe Harbor helped us identify it. The survey helped us identify it. The first time the kids were using was between freshman and sophomore year. It was a huge jump. It went from single digits to like 25, 30% the kids were using. So by the time they were sophomores, a critical mass of kids up to eventually 40% of kids in the high school were using substances. And we were able to jump into that gap where there was no health education on program and create a course that addresses gateway use. So the kids are introduced to all 3 of these substances we're talking about and prescription drug use at this critical time. We address mental health. We do a whole unit on mental health. And it begins not just talking about mental wellness, but we talk about serious topics like suicide prevention. We really get into it because that's the foundation of our program. We've built some other things that set up our kids, like a diversity unit and bullying prevention, cyberbullying, things like that, that set our kids up for success in the 4 years. And it's changed the culture. And it's not just what we've done in school. Brian talks about Safe Harbor. They've been an amazing partnership. And they come into Nicole comes to my classes and meets with the kids. Officer Taylor, we partner with the police. He comes in and takes questions from the kids. We've just had these, not just partnerships, but authentic partnerships with the community that have helped, made a huge impact. And what Brian was saying was absolutely true. It was scary in 2019. 40% of our kids were using, 40% of our kids were vaping. It was as bad as I'd seen it in my 35 years here. And then you look at it now, our numbers are dropped drastically. And I just think that having the survey and our ability to respond to it, and we're doing the same thing right now with senior health. We're seeing that there's a jump between junior and senior year now a little bit. So we're adjusting senior health and sophomore health to adjust to that. And we're seeing trends like Zinn being a new popular product, and we're already on top of that. And we're introducing that to the freshman levels and sophomore and senior levels, and so we can react in time to trends. That's the best part of it, sir.
Yeah.
And that's what I think.
And really, it's preventative maintenance. It's not, everybody says, well, what are the punishments for alcohol? What are the punishments for vaping? What are the punishments for marijuana? And there's a place for that for sure. Preventative is more important. If you never get to that place in the first place and you can prevent that use, you have a group of happier kids who are ready to do what they're supposed to do, which is really where we want to be. Turn it over to you.
All right, yeah, very good. Hi, folks. So if I had to summarize what you're about to see, I would say small numbers, few concerns, but still definitive action in response to those concerns that we have. As you can see, the report focus is very similar to what the high school had. If you please go to the next slide, you'll see that in terms of the percentage rate, the response rate, very similar. High school had 86, we had 81%. I do want to call people's attention to the fact that only 7th and 8th graders took this last year. 6th graders were not asked to take that. That was a decision made by the prior administration that some of these topics for 6th graders just felt a bridge too far. Just literally not even understanding what some of the questions might be, what might be asking. So we're focusing just on 7th and 8th graders for these data. As you can see, we had 154 surveys. If we go to the next slide, we can start getting into some of the breakdowns. Now, one of the things that's important to recognize as we get into this graph, as well as a lot of the other graphs, as I said, the numbers are small, but mental health, similar for the high school, this is the area that is the biggest concern for the middle school data. I do want to call out one of the similarities, as Brian mentioned, is mental health, specifically of our female students. That is the larger concern when we look at the demographic breakdown. And as Brian alluded to, we're already brainstorming some ideas to try to specifically address that. Please stay tuned. Actually, a few of you might get some invites to some of the ideas that we're putting together for that. But that, as I said, as far as a concern, that is the biggest one that came out of these data, was the mental health specifically of our female students. And if we go to the next slide, this is really important to understand. It looks like there was a gigantic spike in 2023 with vaping. It went, however, from 1% to 2%, and then down to 0%. So the way that these have been visualized, it's just a little condensed and telescoped. Someone just taking a casual look might say, what was happening? However, again, as I said, small numbers, right? When we look at this here for the results from last time for vaping, just not a concern in terms of that there. If we go to the next slide, for alcohol use, again, seems to be a giant spike, but ultimately numbers trending down for many of our students there. This is something that I'll address in one of the later issues, which has to do with the perception, the risk perception concerning alcohol. I'll mention that, and that may contribute to the factors that you see there. Marijuana, again, looks like what was happening in 2023, who knows, but again, it was from 0% to 1%, right? And back down to 0% for that. This is the risk perception that I mentioned before, where students were able to select an answer of they felt that this was a great risk or a moderate risk to engage in certain behaviors. So for example, for the alcohol and for binging alcohol on a weekly basis, the percentage levels were roughly in the 80% there. Now, it's an interesting question, right? Like, is that a good number? Is it not a good number? And I think that's something as a community that is worth us digging into. And I know certainly to continue, off of what Ron was saying, it's something that is worth noting. And when I talk about some of the interventions and some of the things that we put into place, in a lot of ways, this is something for us to monitor. I wouldn't necessarily say that these numbers are bad or concerning, but I would be curious what they're going to look like as we continue to move forward. We want to make sure that students do understand the risks that are involved with binge drinking and with some of daily tobacco use, for example. If we go to the next slide, this is where I'll get into some of the major conclusions. that were drawn here, as you saw, those numbers are low when it comes to substance abuse, for sure. Mental health concerns are the biggest concerns, as I mentioned, especially among female students and especially those who are in eighth grade. And as I mentioned, just continuing to monitor and support the education around the risks involved with tobacco, prescription drugs, and binge drinking. So those are things that the curriculum already addresses, and it's a matter of continuing that. And again, let's see where the data leads us. If it is necessary to ramp that up in some way, that's certainly something that we can do. And when we talk about the next steps for the middle school, we've already looked at ways to get counselors into grade 8 wellness classes to appropriately address the topic of suicide. That was, again, with the depressive symptoms. I'm also happy to share that we have partnered with the Samaritans organization, and we're going to be able to bring them in just to the 8th grade at this point. But they are an organization that has a tremendous amount of experience of discussing suicide in a way that is age appropriate. And one of the biggest myths that they bust is that the idea that talking about suicide leads kids to think about it. And they have the research and the data to back that is not the case. And so that's an important element. And having said that, as a parent myself, I certainly can understand that there might be some fear around that idea, but this is an organization that has been doing this for a tremendous amount of time. And we're going to see how it goes for the 8th grade this year, right? We're certainly going to have our own in-house personnel there to monitor and to help support as these things happen. And if it is something that's worth continuing, we can continue. If it is something that is worth expanding, certainly there can be discussions about that. So that's one concrete action that we're taking from the data, again, about the depressive symptoms with mental health there. Our school council, I want to shout them out. They've been involved actively with talking about these results. And one of the things, as you can see there, is that we're looking at ways to customize the survey so that we continue this great record of longitudinal data, right? So that we can continue and build on this 30-year history and trends that we can look at, but also framing it in a way that is more appropriate for 7th and 8th graders. And so that's something that we'll be able to look at. As might have been mentioned, the survey happens every 2 years, so we have plenty of time to be able to go through that. And again, this is one of the values of being in a small district, is that we are able to take the time, and we have the personnel, and we have community members who are willing to do that work. So we're that's what ultimately where we're at, what we're looking forward to doing.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. We'll start with committee members. Do you have any questions or comments for any of our fantastic school leaders? Mr. Dial?
So, obviously, I mean, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, because I'd like to talk, that those numbers are tremendous. It shows identification of an issue, it shows concerted action, it shows response to that action, and certainly correlation, if not causation. So I mean, this is an excellent kind of presentation to receive. It's excellent news as a parent, it's excellent news as a school committee member. So thank you for that. One question I have, and I just want to make sure that we are appropriately lauding the efforts that we're doing. We talked about one of the ideas is that we discovered in the data that the sophomore year seems to be a year that kids get into substance abuse. And then we said, so one of the things we did was move the class and the wellness class so that people taught that. And I guess one of the things I've kind of always thought, just hearkening from my own experience, is that hearing about, the dangers of alcohol abuse, hearing about the dangers of smoking, hearing about the danger, it brings hollow.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's definitely a correlation there, but I think that you guys are either directly or indirectly doing more. And in having the class there, plus Safe Harbor, plus other things, is creating a message to the kids,
Yeah.
that it's okay not to be involved in these things. And I just wanted to float that out as a thought, because as I was looking at this, I'm like, it feels like there's more of the story in how we've dealt with this with the kids.
100%. And if I didn't get it across, it's not just what Ron's done and Melissa's done, and Deb and Mike in the middle school. Curricularly, it's the involvement of the students in Safe Harbor. It's involvement of it's the coordination of their structure, the involvement of the police, the involvement of our counselors, and the various different supports, whether it's the nurse or somebody else. It's having multiple touch points to students who are struggling with anything has made an enormous difference. Having the sports teams on the same page, having parent organizations realize, and we didn't mention it before, that has shifted from sophomore year into junior year, which is a little bit more appropriate. So we have seen a delay and maybe a little bit of a bubble, but it's one of those areas where community prevention and community organization really makes an enormous difference. It's not just the schools. It's the parents, it's the consistent messaging, and it's kids realizing that they're not in the minority if they don't do it, and I've had, I'll give you an anecdote. I had a student come to my office when I was the assistant principal, and he said, I got a problem. And I said, what's your problem? And he said, half of my table wants to drink and half my table wants to go and watch ESPN and eat pizza. And I said, I've met with 3 other kids on the side of the table that you're talking about, and they all have the same concern. So you're not alone. You're all actually of the same mindset. You just think that this is what you're supposed to do. And so, when you breed those more authentic conversations and can have kids talking to each other about, like, this is what we really want to do, that is far more important than what you teach in a curriculum.
And to touch on that, the perception of every kid coming to high school, even us as adults, that everybody drinks, right?
Yeah,
Everybody's a people drink, right? And in 2019, it was close to a majority, 43, 44%, right? Now, I'll even do things like live polls where I'll say to kids, I'll come in and say, first day of doing alcohol, how many people think the majority of kids drink? And 90% of them say the majority of kids drink. And then you say, okay, right now, the actual numbers, 25%. So I get a quarter of them to stand up, go to one side of the room, and leave the other 75%. So that's the actual number. You think it's the majority. Everybody tells you the majority, but it's not. If you want to be in a larger peer group, don't drink. Yeah. And it's when they realized that, it took a lot of pressure off.
Yeah.
And when our kids were in Safe Harbor and started a substance abuse club on their own, it took like someone released the pressure valve for kids to say, hey, I don't have to.
Yeah, I'm with the cool kids now.
And I guess that's what I wanted to kind of ferret out, is that it's not just all the things that you talked about doing are critical important to do it, but they all kind of result in one foundational change, and that's culture change.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what I wanted to make sure we highlight here, is that this is it's all this stuff, and you're also doing it in a way that changes the culture at the school, changes the culture at the community. I mean, growing up, it was a different experience for me. There was always the cool family whose parents would leave alcohol in the basement, and like that's, and I don't think that's as welcomed anymore.
Yeah.
You don't, even among adults, you don't find that cool family anymore who's going to do that. So I think that the dialogue has changed, the culture has changed, and I think it's large part because of the efforts that you guys have put forward. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for the presentation, and these are awesome numbers.
Mr. Evans?
I'm glad you guys brought up the perception versus actual. That was one thing I flagged, because really good data, but even to this day, we see in those surveys that there is still a gap. And one of the reasons we do these surveys is not just for us parents and for administrators to whatever, but to not expose, to really unveil that the truth is different than what people think.
Yep.
And there's that the pressure to do something may just be one that is a cloud more than anything else. And that's why we do it. But I also want to say that I think part of the reason it works is the survey itself has such good legitimacy, because Safe Harbor is now in its 9th year of being a organization that's not punitive based, it's prevention based, it's education based. These surveys are confidential, and we have enough data over 9 years or 8 years, how long we've been doing them now, that we can see trends. We can believe the data. A lot of times we get criticism, our kids are slide. No, this is a survey that kids will see multiple times. They know how the data is going to come out, and we see both trends, but also in the differences between perception and actual. There's real honesty in those responses. I'm glad that one thing I want to point out, though, is we're at the 9th year. Safe Harbor was originally launched with a nice private grant as well as a federal program. That federal program expires on year 10. So we're in year 9. So the Safe Harbor director and the assistant director are funded right now through a program that's going to sunset. And as we're going through, it's not part of the school budget, right? It's part of the town budget. But as we're going into these challenging budget discussions, that's something to remember, that this position that does, it's not on our budget side, but does affect us and it really helps us. So as we're looking at what's important, this is important. And I wanted to just point that out because we can't lose sight of where all the different values are. So thank you guys.
Mr. Evans, Mr. Squadrito?
So this was really impressive overall, and definitely as I looked at this, it's made me reflect and really appreciated your comment about the idea of a tipping point in 2019, because that was something, as you mentioned, that I felt as well. And it was real, and COVID really did cause a complete reset and gave the entire school an opportunity to change course in that moment. And it was really powerful. And I just wanted to vouch for what you said about that change. Like, that was very real. And the other thing, just, the first time I looked at this, the first thing I thought about was vaping. And like you said, the idea that everybody else was doing it. And observing the precipitous decline in vaping from the time I was a little house on the prairie recruit, as you said. Like, I've never vaped, let alone in the building. But just throwing that out there. But I noticed it. There was a time when you couldn't really go to the bathroom without it being the vape room.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that just kind of went away. So these are the kinds of things that make huge differences for students that are really important. And these are hard things to do. Funding these programs, I think a lot of us value them, but for some people it can be hard to see the value in these and understand the impact. But I just wanted to establish that they are extremely important and extremely impactful. And there was a major change in the district after COVID, and as we implemented more of these programs. I don't want to jump the gun onto the budget agenda item for later, but these are really important things that we really, really do not want to risk losing, because they make huge differences. We can, look at test scores, we can look at college admissions, but I think this will probably be the most important data points that I've looked at in my time here. So overall, I just wanted to emphasize that. And also, the last thing I'll say about Safe Harbor definitely also made a huge difference. I had friends who were in Safe Harbor, and it's amazing how Safe Harbor wasn't like a not cool thing to do. Like, it was something that people really enjoyed. And the fact that I think like 20% of students in the district are engaged in it somehow, like that's like remarkable that you can get that amount of people to do something. And Safe Harbor as well absolutely made a difference in the culture in the school. So overall, just very important and a very real presentation. Rob.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Youth risk survey, super important data, always useful for us. Great presentation. Thank you guys for all you do. And I think overall, that is very encouraging. I think as Principal Scott pointed out, some of the most concerning data was around the self-harm that slide, because each percentage point is a person. So I think you articulated that well, and it's something that obviously you're taking seriously. So just two takeaways. One is for me, the biggest takeaway from this is the disparity between male and female students. So, and I again have supreme confidence in our staff and all three of you and leadership I mean, you've identified that as an issue that you're going to dig down on. I'd be interested in hearing, once you've had some time to fully bake that and sort of figure out what you think some of the contributing factors are. I think some people can, we can speculate about what some things are just as human beings, and sometimes social media can be, I think, more impactful for women, or in this case, girls. Obviously speaking out of turn a little bit, I was never an adolescent girl, so, I'm just, and also, I think that we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of, male, emphasized aspects of our community And that could lead to a feeling of sort of disempowerment amongst our daughters and sisters. So maybe that could be something, and it's not to, I'm not, passing any judgments. I'm just saying that that is something that could be a contributing factor, and it is, I think, an objective fact about Cohasset. It's sort of more of a traditional community in a lot of ways. So just I'm happy to hear that, that's a big takeaway for you as well, because I think that's amazing. I've always felt that about Cohasset, that this sort of disparity between the genders is something that we need to always keep a magnifying glass on. With regard to the drinking, so 25%, right, as Mr. Ford was articulating, is a much more comforting figure than what people probably perceive. That said, it's still a fairly significant number of high schoolers. And obviously everyone's working to combat that. I think that I just want to say it because Mr. Dial had alluded to the culture, and I think I share a different sentiment. With all due respect, I think that I think that a lot of that culture comes from the parents and the families and what the kids are seeing and trying to replicate or seeing as being endorsed by families. I think that it is probably, and we've seen the pledge where, you pledge to, I think Safe Harbor does this, pledge. You pledge not to host, parties and have alcohol at your house for minors. And this isn't, I'm not saying this to villainize anyone. I mean, people can make decisions about how to raise their kids themselves, but I do think that it is more prevalent than perhaps people think about the adults in the community maybe providing an outlet for that sort of behavior. I'm not saying it's rampant. I'm just saying that I think people would probably be somewhat surprised by it.
Yeah.
And so it's just something to throw out there and consider that, that is certainly a contributing factor. If you see your caretaker or your mother or your father, and they are sort of endorsing this behavior, that's going to, I think, be absorbed by the child.
Mhm.
So, just want to put it out there, and again, people are free to make whatever decisions they want, but I think that they should factor these things into consideration. I had a sort of competing view or opposing view as to what you were saying, so I just wanted to voice it. But thanks for everything, and I appreciate the time, Madam Chair.
What you identify is the number one risk protective factor. It's the relationship with the parents and the parents' attitude.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, if we crack that nut, we crack the problem 100%.
Well, I will add my thanks to the three of you for not only the presentation, but the way in which you spoke to it and acknowledged that even within small numbers, there are areas for growth. Mr. Scott, when you talked about each of these percentage points in our district is a child, it drove home for me that substance abuse education is a health and safety issue for our children. It's not just sort of a socially oh, don't drink because you're going to get kicked off your team and you're going to be in trouble.
Right.
It really is a health and safety issue, as is emotional and mental health. But it also made me think about, and it's more of a question about personal health and safety in relationships. I'm thinking in intimate relationships, and how sometimes there's an intersection between substance abuse and being at risk for being in unsafe situations regarding personal safety, and where that fits into the curriculum, if it does yet, if not, and are there any surveys about how children experience their personal safety within the community and as they grow up?
About sexual health and that type of relationship?
I think about sexual health, yeah.
So
and sexual assault, sexual abuse.
A lot of, well, I'll let you speak specifically to it, but we partnered with One Love, which is an organization, and Ron can talk a little bit about what that looks like. And there's kind of two levels of focus. One is in sophomore year about relationships, but the other is senior year and what your relationships look like when you're out alone, and you're on your own, and you're at a party, and you're witnessing certain behaviors. So if you want to go into more specifics.
So it starts in freshman year. We talk about what inappropriate messaging is, text messaging, messages that are sent in relationships in our bullying prevention unit. Expands into sophomore year. We really dig into relationships and what's a healthy relationship, what's an unhealthy relationship, what that looks like. That's all part of the sexual health program that's in 10th grade. And then with senior health, like Mr. Scott says, we have that transition to the next step for them. And so not only do we talk about One Love, we provide RAD defense training for our female students here in conjunction with Cohasset Police. So we do a lot of around relationships as it builds through high school. And again, our data shows that the relationship piece becomes bigger their sophomore, junior, senior year than it is their freshman year. Where it's not as much of an issue for our freshmen. So we've crafted our curriculum along those lines. And if our data shows that would change, we could adjust our curriculum in that way. So that's the best part of having this type of data, is that you can really build your curriculum around where the issues are.
I hugely appreciate that flexibility to giving students exactly what they need and what's current and relevant to them.
Yeah.
I will also say that whatever is going on in the elementary schools, I know that at home, I've heard lots of things about how terrible vaping was when my children were in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and really worked to like scare the living daylights out of them in a lot of ways, which and some of that messaging still continues on, which maybe I'm naive now as the parent of 2 teenagers, but I think too that connective piece in an age appropriate way throughout their years in the district, I think is hugely helpful. And as a parent, I'm hugely grateful that it's not just the parents saying these things about substance abuse, about taking care of your bodies, about taking care of mental health, about being a good and kind person, but that we have partners like the wonderful educators here doing that work with us. So,
And to
thank
Lance's
you.
point, there's a certain evolution of it. There's the scare tactics for the kids who are super young, you're not going to do that. Or else, whatever. But then there's the reality. Like, here are the situations you're going to be in. What do you do? What are the strategies? And a lot of what we do with kids as they get older is teach strategies, not just to, study for a test, but to, be in a situation where you're at a party and, maybe you're drinking, maybe you're not drinking, something happens. What do? Do you call 911? Do you reach out to a parent? Are you too afraid the cops are going to come and get you in trouble and you're not going to, be able to play in the next 2 games? Who cares? Right. So creating some perspective for kids around like, you're going to be in real life situations, and these are the things that you need to do to be a good friend.
And thinking through that before proactively rather than reactively or trying to make up your mind in the moment, I think is such a gift. So thank you very much. We have no public comment at the moment. I'm so sorry. I have a blind spot, so I'm going to apologize for that. Oh, okay, good. If you could please introduce yourself, Ms. Saunders, and proceed with your question.
Stephanie Saunders, 10 Stratford Terrace. This is amazing. Thank you guys so much. Just 2 quick things, and I know you have a busy agenda. I did want to make sure the BRIGHT program is highlighted. There's been a lot of talk amongst parents of school refusal, school avoidance, and like Bobby is fantastic. And I think even just like the skills he can teach some kids and the skills that some of Michael's other staff can teach, if there's a way to kind of spread that on a wider level to like bring that to parents, that would be really great. I think I'm hearing a lot about that as a parent.
A lot of our transition kids, some are concussions, some are, physical injuries. A lot of it is mental health. Some of it is substance abuse. And if you've never met Bobby, he's never had a bad day in his life. and to put your kid in front of him who has the skills to be empathetic and to counsel them and just to liven them up is just a gift. I don't know what we would do without him.
Yeah, I think, and I know he's spread thin as it is, but I think that particular topic would be like so important for a lot of parents.
It is important to know
that program has been enormous.
that Mr. Collins works at the middle high school, but school refusal extends into elementary levels as well, and that's on my radar. So I appreciate Stephanie bringing that up as we plan for the future too, and make sure that we can address issues early on. Early intervention is key when it comes to school.
Yeah, and I think even just that, like parents like understanding what that is, because I think there was like a social media post where, I hope you didn't see it, but it was like, force that child to school, it's just kind of like, that's not what that is. So I appreciate that. And then I think just also, that's kind of what the other point I was going to say is just like, this is so amazing. And as someone who's about to have 2 kids at Deer Hill, like I would be interested in how like the Deer Hill curriculum kind of flows into this at some point. Because I do think, unfortunately, like especially post-COVID, a lot of this is happening earlier, and we're seeing some of these issues come up, especially around mental health and females. I think in particular, I hear again just subjectively hearing a lot of that from parents. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saunders. All right, and thank you, Mr. Scapoletti, Mr. Scott, Mr. Ford. And thank you for giving up so much of your evening to us for this wonderful presentation and for the wonderful work you're doing supporting all of our students. So thank you very much. Thank you. We will move on to Block D, the superintendent report with Dr. Sarah Shannon.
All right, well, thank you. So I'd like to start off by just taking a moment to thank the DPW, the Cohasset Police and Fire and Emergency Management, the Facilities Department, and our school custodians for their support and work to get us ready to open school after the snowstorm. As most people have seen on the news, the last storm ended up ranking in the top 10 snowstorms in Massachusetts history. So it was a lot to tackle. And we're very grateful for the work that they did to allow us to get safely back to school when we were able to get back. And we hope very much that the rest of the winter is snow-free. Recently, school committee members, you've all received an email from Jennifer Soretis inviting you to the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents Legislative Breakfast on Thursday, March 5th at 8:30 a.m. This breakfast is an important event and opportunity for superintendents from all over the South Shore, which actually extends into what I'm going to say is non-South Shore towns, but they're wonderful districts and superintendents. And so we invite them in, and we invite all of our local representatives and senators as well. And they're there in the audience to hear the district's concerns so they can learn more about how they can support us. And so school funding will be a key issue that is up for discussion at that breakfast. I would encourage all of you to attend as you're able. I know it's during a work time, and just let Jennifer know if you'd like to join, and she can RSVP for you.
Can we stop them from eating until they give us more than 2%?
I don't know that you can do that, but I think you can try whatever strategy works. This week, I also shared an email with the community about the hiring process that we're engaging in for a search for a new assistant superintendent. Our search committee will begin our work next week, actually, and I am still looking for 2 parent or caregivers to participate in the process. Anyone interested should email me directly. I'm grateful that Chair Lesky will be the school committee rep on that committee to represent this body. And I think it's important to have our families represented as well. In an ideal world, we would have an elementary and a secondary parent or caregiver, but I'm open to whatever combination that looks like. The deadline for emails of interest is this Friday at the end of the day, so I can let folks know by Monday what that committee will look like. And finally, as crazy as it is, I would like to remind all families that February vacation is coming up and that school will be closed February 16th to the 20th, with school resuming on Monday, February 23rd. So before I jump into calendar conversation, are there any questions about the updates?
Any members, go ahead and fire or ask at will.
We don't meet until the 25th then?
Correct.
Thank you.
So we are looking to do a second read of the potential 2026-2027 school calendars. We looked at both the first draft and the second draft last meeting. I do want to address a couple of questions that came up at that time and provide a small update as well. And then take any questions before we get back to or come back at the end of February for a third read and vote, hopefully. So at the last meeting, the question came up about last year's data around Good Friday. because we did do a survey of all staff and families around preference around that day, whether it be a full day of school, a half day of school, which does not impact the last day, or no school. And at that time, we commented that the data was really interesting, that 25.7% of responses said they would like a full day of school on this day. 27%, almost 29, 8% said they would like no school on that day. And 46% wanted a half day. And so that data, I think, helped drive the decision that was made that this year we would have a half day. We have never done that before, so this is the first time it's happening. So I can't report on it because it hasn't happened yet. So that makes this a little bit tricky in thinking about what that decision should be. I will tell you that right now, the number of staff who have put in for that day is similar to last year, even though last year was a full day of school. So that is one data point that we have. We just don't know what the student attendance might look like for that day. So hopefully that will help. There was also a question that came up about the Friday before Labor Day. It is written into the contract that if we start school for students before Labor Day, that Friday would be a holiday date. In talking with someone from the CTA, they also shared that at the time that was decided upon, that there was a feeling that that may have also been driven by parent requests, and that helped the school committee make a decision and make that part of the contract as well. The person I was speaking with also said, not sure where that conversation would go, but always happy to have the conversation if we wanted to look at, if that Friday was a day of school or not. So that is the information that I can bring back to you here. The other thing I had shared at the last meeting was that the early release days weren't on the calendar yet, but that the part of the reason was the Professional Learning Council was trying to gather data from staff. We are still waiting for some of the data to come in, but we actually met this past Monday, and with the results that have come in, it looks like we are leaning towards keeping early release days on Fridays. And so once the data is fully settled in, we'll make decisions about what those days are, and I probably will be able to share with you the next time we meet what those early release dates would be. But like we've said, that those dates don't change the start day, the end day, the last day of school, or any of the vacations. And so what you're wrestling with right now is the meat of the calendar decisions. So, questions?
I think my perspective has changed somewhat since we have 2 school snow days now. So I'm now looking more at that last week as not a what if more of a when, just because of recency bias here. But the question I had is if we have Good Friday closed and the last day for middle school and high school is the 21st and it is a half day.
Mhm.
If we have snow days, does that make does that mean the 21st stays a half day? We have a full day on the 22nd, or do we still have the flexibility to make
No.
the 21st?
The 21st would be a full day.
So it gets,
Whatever becomes the last day of school is an early release half day.
okay, so that's the only day on this calendar that's a function of the 180th day, not the day on the calendar.
Correct.
Okay, great. That's very helpful.
Yes.
Are there any other comments or questions from the committee?
And can I just say one thing? I don't want to confuse things, but I will be coming to you at some point for you to vote on a new last day of school for this year. But I'm holding on that until maybe we get a little bit further through the winter.
I'm gonna be out that day.
So,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or any need for information at this point from committee members that you would like to sort of have from Dr. Shannon before our next meeting and making the vote next meeting? Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Shannon. We are moving into teaching and learning and academic initiatives with Leslie Scollins.
Great, thank you so much. So families know that we had a half day last Friday. It was our professional development afternoon. And it's always a great time for the teachers to have opportunity to collaborate, work on things together. So Deer Hill and Osgood, they had created working groups this year. And so they were collaborating on a variety of topics that included things like belonging, homework, and MTSS. So that was a very successful afternoon. The middle and high school faculty, they were focused on their department work. And it's always good for them to have kind of a little extra chunk of time to be together. Last night, Deer Hill had their second home grading parent caregiver evening. We had 3 parents and caregivers, and 9 teachers came in and shared their thoughts. I will say that earlier in the year, there was an event, a fall discussion, and that group was very well attended by parents and caregivers. So hopefully, maybe it was the cold weather, who knows, but it's really nice when we can get our parents and caregivers into events such as this to give their feedback. It's really important. Tomorrow is the second annual Collaboration Day, and that is an event that happens across the grade level, so elementary up through high school, and they create an art project, and some of you might remember them, and they're still around the buildings, and it's a really wonderful day. The children come up from the elementary school, and they spend their whole day working together. It's a really wonderful day for them. And we have local artisans that are coming in to participate in the event tomorrow. And so they will be here at our next meeting to present their projects. So that's a wonderful, wonderful day. And it's such a nice tradition that has started. And then just finally, we continue our curriculum work. So the visual and performing arts curriculum review committee will be working on Friday afternoon, just kind of that midpoint check-in, look at the action plan, and collaborate on some of the goals that we're working on.
That's it. All right. Thank you very much. Any questions for Dr. Scollins? All right. Thank you, Dr. Scollins. The piece of art with, or the 2 or 3 pieces of art that were created last year, I feel like maybe one of them is in the central office right now.
Yep.
I was reminded of what a special program that is, and I can't wait to see what they create this time around.
There's one hanging in every building.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Mr. Stapleton, some student services update, and Ms. Saunders, if you want to join us as a CPAC rep, you're welcome to do so.
So hi everyone, good evening. I'm here with 3 updates today, so I'll jump right in and share my screen and move through. So the first update is my typical data sharing. I'm not going to spend too much time here today just because I do have a little bit more of a substantial update in other areas, but the month of January was very busy for the Office of Student Services and Special Education. There were 44 total meetings across the district, so that data is reflected within here. And really, the focus of my update today is in response to the school committee's request for our student services perspective on Dr. Scollins' most recent spring 2025 data report. So I'll go through some slides that I prepared from my perspective as the Director of Student Services, really as it connects to data tied to district-wide assessments. Really, the statewide assessment of MCAS is a major focus here, but really how that connects to students with disabilities. Dr. Scollins shared an overview, and Dr. Scollins jump in at any point, through this presentation tonight. Shared some of the overarching data that has been compiled from MCAS, from iReady in her December meeting. In an area that I wanted to highlight from my perspective, both as a former special education teacher, team chair, and then director of student services, is really highlighting, student development and growth percentiles as it connects specifically to MCAS, but then also how we measure student progress over time. I wanted to start tonight by saying, students with disabilities who may be receiving special education services or students eligible through Section 504 for accommodation plans, develop academic skills potentially over long, and this looks different for all students and all individuals, but develop academic skills over longer and less linear timelines typically, and sometimes year-to-year gains may look different compared to typically developing peers or students that do not have disabilities. But it's important for us to consider, multiple data points in that and how we're constantly monitoring student progress, how they're performing on multiple measures. But when we look at some specific scores tied to MCAS, there may be some conversation about like, why did my student have this score and what does this look like, moving forward with that goal of, proficiency by the time they reach 10th grade. So like I just indicated, progress is monitored using multiple data points ranging from classroom assessment, classroom performance, progress towards IEP goals, objectives. That's reviewed annually or more frequently depending on student progress or lack of progress. Looking at standardized measures such as iReady, and then also statewide measures such as MCAS. But really, I think it's important for families in the community to recognize that we should always be focusing on individual growth rather than just single year performance or single year data points such as MCAS. While it's an important factor, there's a lot that goes into how a student makes progress over time, how they're accessing the curriculum, and then also feeling confident about themselves as a learner and as they grow. So MCAS, defines student growth percentiles, and I included the chart here from the MCAS handbook. A typical growth percentile will be within the 41 to 60, but we're looking at 50 as typical growth. A high student growth percentile indicates strong progress over time, as indicated by the chart. And then this helps us distinguish a lack of progress from steady growth along different developmental paths. So keeping in mind that this may look different from year to year for students, but this is an important measure, not just like that final score of not meeting expectations, partially meeting or exceeding. So an example that I gave here is that a student may have partially met MCAS, ELA MCAS within that standard score range. However, they had a student growth percentile of 62, which is high growth for the student, which would be great to see, from year to year or just even one single year. And my kind of main point here is that for students with disabilities, growth over time, not just proficiency on standardized assessments, is the most accurate indicator of effective student learning and progress. And we really want to see, all kids develop differently, all kids acquire skills at different times. So really thinking globally over time, how students make progress is a really important perspective to take. And, one that, I hope, we do take here in Cohasset for our students. So I broke down an example here of how we could use this measure in addition to just the score from a standardized assessment. So in this example, a 5th grade student with a specific learning disability scores not meeting expectations on MCAS in 4th and 5th grade. At a first glance, that's definitely something, and again, still something that we want to keep a close eye on and monitor. But when we dig into more data points and we consider the student more holistically and we take a closer look, we might see the following, for example. The student's scaled score increased from one year to the next, showing that they maybe did gain some proficiency in some skills. The student, again, I use the example of a growth percentile of 62, meaning that they grew more than 60% of students statewide with similar prior scores. As an IEP team meeting, we might come together and say the student has a reading comprehension goal or a reading decoding and fluency goal. And if they are receiving specialized instruction in reading, they may have mastered those specific blends, or for example, like some of that specialized reading work. They may have mastered their IEP goals and moved on sequentially through like a multi-sensory reading program. The general education teacher might share that the student is actually really able to access the grade level curriculum. They participate in class discussions. They're able to work well with peers, either with disabilities or without. That they have some meaningful contributions to group, the group work that takes place. Families might give input that, while yes, this score might not be meeting expectations right now, we're seeing them apply their reading skills at home with independent reading. We see some generalization of skills happening, not just within the classroom, but out, whether they're reading with their friends or parents. And then also more importantly too, like students may be feeling happy and confident about coming to school. They feel like they're making progress. We're seeing it in different measures. And I think that's, always been something that I've championed too, is that, we want students to feel well about how they're performing. And, there could be a variety of performance, how they perform in different things. But it all tells one story. And I think that it's important that we consider like multiple data points as we move them forward and support them. And again, what this example could tell us is that they might not have reached grade level proficiency according to MCAS standards, but they are making strong, meaningful academic progress relative to their own strengths and their own disabilities, and then their own kind of on their own developmental path. When we think about how we support special education students, and this slide really kind of pulls together a few different things here. As I've mentioned before, students receiving special ed services have clearly outlined individualized education programs or IEPs. Contents of those IEPs include, specific goals and objectives that students are working towards that's driven through data as students are found eligible. students receive specialized instruction, so something that's, different than the general education curriculum, tied to the service delivery and those specific goals, and those are provided by, licensed qualified special education teachers, related service providers such as occupational therapists or speech language pathologists. And, IEPs do indicate appropriate accommodations and modifications that are necessary for students to access the grade level curriculum. And those accommodations are provided throughout their school day towards, whether taking iReady and then also on statewide assessments such as MCAS. A lot of the work that I did last year, thanks to the community and just different stakeholders, focused on the SPED Strategies Task Force, which I linked that final presentation in here, highlighted in pink. And so last year we started to look at why is there a proficiency gap for our students with disabilities on statewide assessments. And so that work's been continuing on as well. And I just think it's important to highlight that the district does provide, a high level of specialized targeted support in reading, writing, math, and executive functioning. We're working on aligning those supports, across the district to make sure that services, are in a good continuum. And so again, that task force work that we've done is still continuing on this year, and really looks at closing that proficiency gap for students with disabilities. And, in addition to thinking about the progress that they made individualized with their SGP. Each time that an IEP team meeting meets for an annual review team meeting, teams carefully consider and determine appropriate testing accommodations. These accommodations, like I just mentioned, are directly aligned with what students need routinely in order to make progress and to access the curriculum. And I've linked in here too the MCAS accommodation information, just as a resource for families to be aware of. If you have an upcoming IEP meeting, it's always helpful to review that. There's some pretty strict criteria for certain accommodations with MCAS, but that's something that all of our teams are able to discuss with families on if it's an appropriate accommodation or not for their student when the IEP team is together. And then additionally, special ed teachers, we work to analyze student performance on MCAS, on iReady. That helps drive, our instructional practices in areas of, weakness or an area that needs to be targeted. I use the example of, if we look back and we notice that a student, whether it's on iReady or MCAS, really struggled with informational texts, a special ed teacher might work that into their lessons with the student. So there's more practice and repetition of the skills related to reading comprehension and writing, specific to different areas that the student has shown to have weaknesses with. So these are just, some areas, the main areas of how we support students, special education students related to assessments. Not meeting expectations on MCAS obviously is, jarring for families, and we recognize that. So I did an analysis of some of the data from the 2025 school year that Dr. Scarlett shared before. And a small number of students in each grade level scored within the not meeting expectation range. So that's a scaled score between 440 and 469. Some positive news, in my opinion, is that through that analysis of the data, for ELA, all students who did not meet this range are either identified special education students or high need students, or in a third bracket of students receiving support by specialists, whether that's reading or for reading specifically for ELA, and that are being monitored through our student response teams or the MTSS process. So I think that's important to highlight because, when Dr. Scarlett shared that report, we are taking the time to look to see what students aren't meeting expectations and supports and services are put into place for those students. And again, we've talked a lot tonight through different presentations about the size of Cohasset. I think that's one of our great strengths is that we are able to really work individually with students in small groups with students to make sure that students get what they need, in order to access the curriculum and make effective progress. And similarly for math, here all students were either identified special education students or high need students with comprehensive IEPs. I would say with moderate to significant levels of service tied to specific goals for math. So again, I think we're catching and supporting those students. And to tie back to the original slide of they might not be meeting that proficiency level every year, but we are seeing growth with them. And we're also identifying the right areas to target and provide highly specialized support for. I also wanted to highlight that families play an important role in working with school-based teams. I think our special liaisons and, Stephanie, any input here is welcome to really work with families to hear how students are doing, students that are receiving services, how we can adapt and adjust goals, service delivery, accommodations to make effective progress. And so we do welcome that family input, especially when you get a score report, you might need help unpacking what that looks like, or they might perform well on the first iReady and the second iReady you see a dip. There's always time to have those dialogues about why that could be. Sometimes the kid's having a bad day and that could be a part of it. Other times, maybe we need to do a little more digging in. So I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that Our goal specific to MCAS is always to get students to reach that competency level, which is no longer a requirement for graduation, due to how people across the Commonwealth voted for that. But we still have our own competency determination here through Cohasset High School and by the school committee. But our goal is always like that one measure was always the goal, and we really have worked hard to get kids there. And in my time here, it might have required some retakes, but students have always reached that level connected to MCAS. I also linked in some information too for students with very significant cognitive disabilities, and this really should be less than 1% of the population, are eligible to take the MCAS alternative assessment, which is a portfolio assessment. As a former severe special education teacher, this really is looking at like the grade level standards and then spiraling back to entry points. And the teacher is the one responsible for putting together an MCAS portfolio for individual students. Again, at this time, we don't currently have any students within the current public school that have the MCAS alt. We have in the past. Typically, those students would be in a partial inclusion or substantially separate program. Typically, this falls for students who are in out-of-district placements, and those special education teachers and teams are responsible for putting the portfolio together. And then I grabbed 3 student examples just to use here. 2 students you can see are in upper level grades. It shows their ELA scores, from 5 through 10. It isn't taken in grade 9, which is why no data is shown there. And then student C is a younger student. And so in these 2 stories, again, these are positive stories to be completely transparent, but you see that it can vary from year to year. This student had a 42% SGP here, and then that dropped down. By the end, though, their scores went up significantly from partially meeting in 5th grade to a score of 525, which is solidly within the meeting range. And again, seeing great growth over time. Again, not to give away, obviously, this is confidential student information, but knowing the student and that's, again, our great strength is that we can champion the student, and to know who they are and to see that growth over time is one of our great strengths. Same thing here with student B. Again, like huge, unbelievable growth over time, and then solidly landing within the proficiency range. And student C is a student, highly who receives a high level of service. To see like 75 here in this year is like unbelievable, knowing the work that they did. And it just connects to that, like, wow, this is quantitative data. Like, I think our teams and our parents, like, we know our students so well, and it's also the qualitative data of how they progress each year that is so important. And so again, these are just 3 examples, but I thought it was a nice snapshot to kind of connect to the overall idea that it does look different for all students, especially with students with disabilities. It's not always linear. We'll see ups, we'll see downs. But fortunately, we have a lot of great services and supports in place to help our students, hopefully reach that goal by 10th grade, and then see some even greater things too, as they go into their junior and their senior year. So that is my first section. I guess I'll go through the second or the third part here before questions. If that makes sense. So my third update tonight is the findings from our English language learner integrated monitoring review. As I mentioned, this is our major compliance year. So after the circuit breaker audit, this was number 2. So I wanted to highlight a little bit more about our ELE program as well. So Cohasset Public Schools currently employs a half-time FTE staff member, Maura Burke, who is our English as a second language learner teacher. Maura was a huge resource to me during this process of the integrated monitoring review. She was instrumental in how I updated our own process guide, conducted the interviews, and really just used her expertise to help get all this information collected. I did want to note that Maura is assigned to all 4 buildings, so Osgood, Deer Hill, the middle school, and the high school. For this current school year, Cohasset High School is the only school with 3 active ELL students, and there are also 3 former English language learners. So those are students who have reached, a level of competency and then are monitored for 4 years after they're determined to no longer be an active student. And so I did want to highlight that this can be very tricky when we have a student in Osgood and then, 2 students at the high school. When we think about logistically, like juggling schedules, making sure she's available because she is only part-time. But again, Maura does really great work and has really done a nice job to support the current students and the former EL students. The type of program that Cohasset has is a sheltered English immersion program. So I listed the definition in here. But again, English language acquisition process happens, within the classroom setting, and instruction and materials are in English. But there are supplements that are provided. So students who receive ESL support work with Maura. She helps scaffold their assignments. She provides, direct instruction for them, and she works closely with the general education teachers to adapt and modify materials as necessary, with the goal of the English language instruction occurring. I've linked up here some resources through DESE. Again, I've learned a lot through this process of integrated monitoring review. This isn't my background necessarily an area of expertise, but this was a great process for me to just think about the district as a whole and how we move this program forward. Because in other districts, they have a much higher number of English language learner students. We're unique in that sense, but you never know if a family was to move in with 4 students that are all eligible, that really could impact our numbers and the work that Mora does on the day-to-day. For the integrated monitoring review findings, we were found to be fully implemented a number of the EL standards. However, we partially implemented the following standards here. So these 4 standards. So our next step is to develop a continuous improvement and monitoring plan that's due for review to DESE by February 27th. So I'm working on finalizing that right now. And I've really kind of indicated the key findings and then our next action steps.
Mr. Stable, do you know offhand what those specific standards are?
So yes, there's a process guide for that. You'll see here, like the 4 findings that we were cited for. Yep, are listed within the chart. So the first finding, which to me is the most important way to move forward, is that we were found that we're in the process of revising procedures to identify English learners who do not meet English proficiency benchmarks. So that's through the access testing that takes place each year. And so we really need to polish our procedure for how we support these students who are indicated to not be making progress. I had been left by the prior director, like the process guide for the ELE program. So over the course of last year, I was working to polish that. So we do have a new one on our website, but now we're kind of refining that even further, tied to some of these specific standards. And so our goal moving forward will be to, following the access testing of 2026, anyone who is indicated to not make progress will be reconvening those teams. Language acquisition teams include current teachers, building principal administration, myself, and Mora, really to review assessment data, not just access, but also classroom performance data. We do, monitor some of these students through MTSS. And then we're going to track and document their progress moving forward. So thinking of it almost as like a special education, like IEP team perspective, having some more concrete protocols and expectations for how we convene these teams and how we work with families. The second indicator that we were flagged for partially meeting is follow-up support. Like I mentioned, we do have 3 former English language learners, and we have a responsibility as a district to monitor those students as well. David Parker, who conducted the audit from DESE, indicated that we have informal procedures to be doing this, and that came through the interview process with both myself, with Mora, how we document student progress, but we really need to refine this process for former English language learners. And then set a more standardized schedule for review. Again, I can contribute this a little bit to Mora, is a part-time staff. So when she's here, she's very on the ground working with students, tracking that. But her and I will be setting some time to do a little bit more like periodic review of these students and more formalized, and also be documenting that process as well. The third finding was licensure requirements. So SEI teachers are required to be SEI endorsed. And that data found that most or core academic teachers that are assigned to provide this instruction hold the SEI teacher endorsement, but not all. So Dr. Scollins, building principals, and I, will be doing an audit of staff to ensure that they do have the proper endorsement in order to provide the SEI instruction to students. And then the final finding was another administrative finding. A review of documents requested from the district indicated that the district does not consistently keep all required documents in students' EL records. As the director of student services, I house all the special education records for special education records. I'm going to adopt the EL records as well into my office and work with Mora to use the DESE template for the program folder checklist to make sure that we're in full compliance with how we record keep for our students and make those documents available need be to families. So that was the 4th finding. So again, I learned a lot through this process. Mora was really helpful to help move through this process. And then we have these 4 areas to refine and move forward. So the corrective action plan will be submitted by the end of February. And David Parker shared that, based on the nature of these findings, it's that we can easily course correct to be fully implemented within a short period of time.
Mr. Stapleton, do we have any, actually, Ms. Saunders, if you have anything to share from CPAC, and then we'll do committee questions.
Yeah. Thank you for your thoughtful presentation as always. I think it's a little bit of a relief as a parent of a child with some learning disabilities to not focus on MCAS. I really like what you said about the importance of children being happy and confident. And that, I think, from what I've heard from other parents, the kind of stress around that and the talk about how important it can be really, really challenging. It's like obviously wonderful that our district does so well on MCAS, but if you're in the people that don't do well, that can be a challenging place to be. So looking at other ways to measure success is always really, I think, wonderful individually for families. But I look if there's ways to celebrate that more as a community. I appreciate that personally as well. And I do want to say my daughter was the one in the sequin bomber jacket doing the Pledge of Allegiance 2 weeks ago. So she has grown a lot, and I thank you and your staff for that. That's all I have.
She's adorable.
And this is like
happy and confident.
Yes.
We were away, so I watched it and I was like, what is she doing in there?
She was owning,
She owned the stage.
Yeah.
I was about to offer up the chair.
I know. She would take it, yeah. Confidence.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we have committee questions or comments for Mr. Stapleton, Mr. Evans?
Thank you very much, as always. I don't know. I'm not involved in your world, but the clarity, the passion, and I guess the progress, I think how you laid this out, and I'm proud of our district with what you guys do. So thank you.
Mr. Dial?
Nothing for me, other than to say that, obviously we've got the data. There's a lot to digest on the MCAS results and the way you analyze that. And I really appreciate the lens through which you view that data. And it really does help me digest it a little bit better as a community member. So thank you for that. And then lastly, on the audit, I can understand that given that wasn't your background, that could be challenging. I very much appreciate that you took it as a learning opportunity. And you did exactly what we should do. We found deficiencies and we are taking action to move forward. So that presentation left me with a high degree of confidence in what you're doing and where our program is going. So thank you very much.
So much information here, so there's not much more I could add. But I just want to agree with what Ms. Saunders brought up. We focus a lot on MCAS, but I really liked this metric of the student growth percentile because obviously it's a different way of looking at the raw score. But as you kind of pointed out, you take a student perspective at it and you can say, look at these 3 students and I know they're growing. And it's really powerful and it makes a big difference. So just wanted to emphasize that as you did.
Mr. McCullough?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Stapleton, I've said it before. I mean, your professional, data-driven approach inspires confidence. You've built a really strong team around you. You demonstrate genuine empathy and connection to our students, which makes our student services division department very strong. And obviously, you collaborate very effectively with all of our classroom teachers who also play a major role in ensuring that our students grow. So thanks for all you do.
I will just continue to laud your work. Thank you. I think in particular, I just sort of want to pick up on a thread that Mr. Dial said, that seeing this opportunity when you go through an audit to grow as a person, just to sort of understand that field a little bit better, but also to say, here are some areas where we can improve and we're going to do that, and doing so in such a clear and transparent way. Like perfection. So thank you. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions regarding this presentation? Thank you very much. We'll continue to move on. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So as we go into the budget presentation for FY27 this week, I want to start by sort of setting a stage for how the budget presentations will go moving forward. Every presentation that I have is going to build upon the last. And so at the start of each presentation will be all of the new information that I have to share with you on a given evening. And then everything else I have shared in the past is still there for reference for the community and for yourselves. In conversation with Chair and Vice Chair, I'm not going to be repeating the entire presentation. It is
readily available online on Facebook live stream or Cohasset live stream and on our website. But what I would invite is that anybody who watches it or has questions to call me, to come in and meet with me. I am happy to go through questions that people have or different points that have been highlighted in prior presentations. And, you know, tonight's presentation is designed to highlight both where we are in this current moment, literally as of today in my conversation with Michelle Leary, who's our interim town manager. It's also designed to highlight the work that has been done amongst the leadership team between the last meeting and this meeting. And it continues to answer some questions that have come my way already around the budget and some other thoughts around how do we continue to fund the school. And so I will share that information and then again, happy to answer any questions. So since our last meeting, the governor's budget has come in. It came in at a 2.03% increase over last year, and that comes in for the entire municipality, so the town. You know, that's
Not an increase.
it's not great news for any of us. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the town, the school, the police, the fire department, the DPW. 2% increase does not give the town a lot more money to actually work with. And when you listen to the governor's budget in which she shared about it, and she talks about two things. She talked about this great increase for Chapter 70, and she talks about fully funding the Student Opportunity Act. First and foremost, it's important to note that Cohasset actually gets $0 from the Student Opportunity Act. So while it's great that it's fully funded for the districts that it funds, it does not support us in any way. The increase in Chapter 70, always helpful. In actual dollars, that's an increase of $104,000 to Cohasset. When you're talking about a budget, the size of a budget we're looking for, that is helpful, but doesn't move the needle. So it wasn't super helpful what came in from the governor's budget. In collaboration with the interim town manager, we are now expecting close to a 4% increase. As I've been saying all along, she has been looking to try to get us to 6%. We really think that 4-ish% is the most realistic that we can get. And that is with the town finding ways to support us in ways they have never supported us before or haven't in recent history. And with them taking a share of the load as well. There's not enough money to fund, I'm gonna say town and schools in general. And so we're trying to share the increases, but we're also trying to share the parts of the budget that are hard. So I appreciate the collaboration in that way. So a 4% increase for us does mean an additional $993,233 for next year. But it also leaves us from that initial 11.8% increase with a deficit of almost $2 million, 1.9 from level service plus what we need. So this presentation will offer initial recommendations for closing this financial gap. It does not go into specifics because there are still a lot of moving parts. And it's hard to say that, but there's a reality to that. You know, we are still, the governor's budget could still be shifted a little bit. It may come in with a few extra dollars in its final stages. You'll see a line item that we're going to look at with regard to retirement. If more retirements come in, it helps us. So there are so many moving pieces to this, and it's hard at this point, this early, to be super specific about what exact positions will have to be reduced. But we are looking at that. One thing I did want to note, it was interesting, a little bit of history that needed to be changed here. in 2020 to 21, and I think that part of why it didn't come out at first glance was because people had blocked out the early COVID stages of life. They actually, in the middle of the year, brought in a sixth, fourth grade teacher. And so while they started grade 4 with 5 teachers and average class sizes of 23, midway through the year, brought in a sixth, brought the class sizes down to 19. That sixth section moved to 5th grade for 21, 22. So there were 6 sections of 5th grade that year with an average class size of 19. And then the following year in 2020 to 23, that extra section was eliminated because of the decrease in class sizes. So I just wanted to correct that now that we know better. And so just share that slide for informational purposes. I also wanted to just share this slide because I think it's helpful for people to see exactly what a percent looks like, whether percent allocated or percent of reduction that we're looking to get. You'll see that 4% over and above our FY26 numbers is highlighted in red because that is what we are looking at for FY26. Those numbers are the same that I just mentioned on the first slide. And so this is draft because this is still very much in flux. But these are the areas where we are looking to save. Some of these reductions are reductions that, when we use the data, specifically class size data, makes some sense. When we look at data in terms of money spent over the course of time, it makes sense. And so that's how we're driving our decisions, because we don't want to reduce in areas that will have a higher impact than others. And so some things that are presented in the initial budget that we are looking to take out are fully funding full-day kindergarten. We have met with instructional technology and have a meeting scheduled for Friday with facilities. We think we can save approximately $25,000 to $50,000 there. Every principal, every department, Leslie and I, Ms. Owens, have looked at all of our supplies and materials, all of our professional development, all curriculum and instruction resources. And while it is not ideal, and we will go without, and we will not be able to do many of the things that are outlined in our strategic plan the way we thought we would, we think we can reduce about $200,000 from that combination of lines. As we get into the next phase of this, we'll be able to tell you more specifically exactly what those things are, because I've been keeping a list. But I think, one of the things about schools that is wonderful and yet challenging in a process like this is that every educator does this because they love their jobs, because they love their students, and they really support one another. And there is nobody better at making do and doing without than teachers. And so part of my fear with some of these reductions is actually that while the impact will be there, not everybody will really see it because our teachers are amazing and they're going to make do. But that doesn't mean we didn't need something or that we don't need it going forward. And I just want that to be something that the community really understands, because while it says $200,000 there, those aren't decisions that are made lightly, and it means somebody is going without something, but that they're willing to make do for a year to get what we need to do and to maintain as many staff as we can.
Dr. Shannon?
Yes.
Do you mind expanding as well on professional development from a parent perspective? A PD day is a day that we have to take care of our kids, but it is so important in how our
So
education happens. Could you just expand on what PD is and why it is important?
Yeah, so
Since we're talking about.
So we have a brand new strategic plan. And we have a strategic plan that is ambitious and it helps us become one of the, leading districts in the state, if not beyond. Some of that work is around rethinking homework and grading. A lot of that work is around project-based and deeper learning. A lot of that work is around understanding what's good for kids and helping them, going back to the youth risk behavior survey, helping them be healthy, happy so that they can do their best academically. Our goal outlined in the strategic plan is that we were going to start in our project-based learning steering committee has been working on a rollout plan for the next 3 to 5 years to build the capacity of staff to be able to do more project-based learning with students. Having worked for a company that did that work with districts, I can tell you that is a commitment, it's a financial commitment, it's a time commitment, and we use those professional days to do work just like that. And so when we look at trying to move the district forward with regard to project-based learning, that work is going to happen more slowly and may have to be paused until we have the financial resources to do that. Same with bringing, supporting the district and the teachers in doing rethinking grading work. Because we use those days to do that work. And it's not just professional development where we bring people in to teach the teachers. Some of that time is actually time that the teachers need to work together to redesign curriculum, to redesign processes, to be thoughtful with one another about what does grading look like in grade 7 or across the English department? How do we come up with a philosophy? The biggest difference between professional learning in school settings and I think in the corporate world is that our jobs, 90% of the time we have students in front of us. So the only time we have to do this other work that has to be done in order to move the district forward is days where our students aren't here, but we are here. And so that's where we will be losing out in terms of professional development. Now, we'll still have professional development. We'll rely on each other. I will be looking for outside grants. They're just far and few between for districts like us. And I say like us, it goes back to like the Student Opportunity Act. We don't often qualify for much of the funding that is out there. But we will use every resource we have. We did a professional development day on the 22nd that was led by our educators. It was outstanding. There was some amazing learning that happened amongst the staff, from the staff. And we will continue to build on that without additional funding. So again, that retirement savings line is in flux. We don't know where that will land, but for every teacher that retires, there is a potential savings because teachers who have been here for a long time make a higher salary than a potentially brand new 23, 24-year-old teacher would. And so there's an inherent savings in there. We're also looking at all of our stipends, clubs, and athletics to try and come up with approximately $125,000 or a little over $100,000 savings there. But beyond that, if you think back to the last presentation where 80% of our budget is staffing, you'll see that a majority of the work that we have to do to get to that almost $2 million is staff. And so we are looking at FTEs across the whole district. So that's classrooms, it's offices, it's across the district, it's everywhere, in folks in all different types of roles. And so we think that that could be between 15 and 20 FTE, which stands for full-time equivalency. But that does not necessarily mean it's that exact number of people. we have part-time teachers, we have, you know, folks who teach 0.4, 0.8 out of the 1.0. And so, all of that matters when we look at this. And because of different levels of where staff are, no one staff member is the same amount of savings as another. And so, and I don't want to talk about a staff member in terms of savings because that is not how we feel about people. But when we are looking to factor amounts of getting us to this closing of this gap, we do look at those salary numbers. And so that makes a difference. And so trying to figure out exactly what that looks like is taking us a little bit more time, and we're trying to be really cautious. So that's what we think right now. We are continuing to look at everything above the staffing number to see if we can save more in those areas so that we can save less in the staffing number. And so that's why it's still in draft form, and why hopefully when we come back after February vacation, we'll have a more firm grasp of this to share with you. You know, as we've been presenting this and having conversations with people, there have been a lot of questions around overrides. And so I just want to share a little bit with the community around overrides, and you know, starting with the idea that there are two different types of overrides. There's a Proposition 2.5 override, and then there's actually something called a debt exclusion override. So the Proposition 2.5 override was actually something that was created in a way to sustain schools and towns and town departments. The Mass Municipal Association actually put out a report recently about why that structure is not working. And it's because people aren't using the override structure to do what it was intended to do, which is to provide ongoing increases in funding to schools and towns. And so you'll see a lot of communities around us and across the state who are going for Proposition 2.5 overrides, because what it does is it allows Cohasset to raise taxes above the 2.5% limit, because the law currently limits annual property tax increase to 2.5% plus new growth. That's the new growth number that's embedded within the town's budget. In order to go above that, we need to do a Proposition 2.5 override. It is a one-time vote. First, well, it's a one-time vote, but it happens twice. First, it has to be voted upon at annual town meeting. And then if it passes at town meeting, it goes to the ballot. So you have to vote twice as a community. And that vote equals a permanent increase to the tax base, which then goes to whatever we are saying needs to be funded, whether it's school and town, school and police, however it ends up looking like. But it only happens with voter approval. And it's really to fund essential services when there isn't enough money to fund the essential needs of whatever department we're looking at. And so while technically there is time to look for an override for FY27, we are facing a bigger issue. It's a long-term concern that we have, because if we solve the problem for FY27, we're going to have the exact same problem for FY28, FY29, and beyond. And the town is in the same boat as us. If people are watching select board meetings, the interim town manager is talking about the exact same things we are talking about. There's not enough of an increase available on their side, and they are going to have to make reductions and have hard decisions as well. So this is a community concern. And in order to even move a Proposition 2.5 override forward, you need consensus between the school committee, the select board, and the advisory committee. And we need to have a sustainable plan. We need to know what it would look like to sustain the schools for the next X number of years, ideally 3 to 5 years. And we need to know those numbers so that we aren't coming back to the community and saying each year we need more money. We want to say to the community up front, we need X amount of dollars to support everybody. And then we will probably be coming back to you at the end of that time period because the town will be in that same position again. And so, the thinking is rather than right now trying to fix in the short term and have immediate gratification, how do we play the long game? How do we solve this problem for the next 3 to 5 years for the schools so that we are more financially soluble? So that's the thinking right now. And we are trying to balance that with this idea of a debt exclusion override, which is actually different than a Proposition 2.5 override. A debt exclusion override is a temporary impact on people's taxes. It is for a defined period of time, typically for as long as the debt exists. And it is designed to support very specific capital projects such as school buildings, renovations, major infrastructure. And the cost of the debt exclusion override does go on your taxes, but for only the life of that debt. It is in some ways similar to the Prop 2.5 override because it must pass a vote at town meeting and then has to pass a ballot vote as well. So, the question has come up, given the school building projects, will we be looking for both kinds of overrides? And the answer is yes. We need to be talking about both overrides, both the operational Proposition 2.5 override to support the operations of the school. And then the schools will be seeking a debt exclusion override likely in the spring to support the feasibility study now that we've been accepted into the MSBA core process. And then again, this is still unknown because it depends on where we are in the process. Either winter of 2027, spring of 27, or winter of 28 for the full building project. And I used the figure based on the last feasibility study we did. We don't know what the actual cost would be. But it would be in the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars likely to do any middle school, high school project. And we know that the MSBA reimbursement rate is a little over 30%. And so we would be seeking potentially 2 debt exclusion overrides in the near future as well. And so this slide just sort of captures again the comparison between the 2 types of overrides. And in full transparency, there is a good chance that the schools will be needing to seek both types of overrides over the next few years for very different purposes. And one cannot be used for the other purpose. So a Proposition 2.5 override cannot be used to fund the school project work, and a debt exclusion override cannot be used to fund the operational aspects of a school. And so our next steps in this work of doing the FY27 budget is that the leadership team will continue to identify final recommendations for closing the gap for FY27. Next Tuesday, February 10th, will be a joint school committee, select board, and advisory meeting where we will present the FY27 budget. And we will continue to update the community at every school committee meeting from now through the middle of March. We will hold a public school committee budget hearing on March 18th at 5 p.m. prior to the regular school committee meeting here in this room and online. And then the school committee will vote on a proposed FY27 budget on March 20th. And so at this point, I will take any questions on where we are now with the work on the FY '27 budget.
Thank you, Dr. Shannon. Mr. Dial, do you want to kick us off with any questions or comments you might have?
I uncharacteristically actually have no questions or comments. That's, I mean, painted the picture of what it is. I know from our other discussions how hard you were working to find things. It is a difficult situation, so hopefully we will find some relief, but I mean, we'll continue working on it.
Mr. Evans?
I'm going to try to not comment at all about the debt exclusion part of that, because I feel like we have an immediate problem and a long-term problem. So I'm going to try to focus on the immediate problem. I spent a lot of time, too much time, watching a lot of the override campaigns from other towns. One of the towns that's not close, not far from us, had a failed override. I've mentioned them before, and it was really catastrophic. And I looked at how they went around, how they talked about it, and they used a lot of kind of emergency language, like this is going to be catastrophic if we don't do it. And I looked at other towns that had the same way, and to me, the pattern seems like towns that present overrides that are presented as a plan forward rather than an emergency stopgap have a better chance of success. So what I want to float here is, if we just putting a dot on the calendar, we plan for an FY '28 override in the fall, a little bit early, because the more time we have to adjust up or down after that, or maybe do a revision, whatever it is, we need to have more time. So this isn't, I don't want us to wait for an override, 2.5 override for operating until next spring. And I don't think that's really the plan, but I want to put that out there that it's going to be probably at special town meeting, because that's going to give us a lot of time. Another one of the districts that is close to us did successfully pass an override a few years back, or maybe last year. But part of the agreement of that override was a cap to how much they could increase every year. And now they're in this position where they're cutting, even though they passed an override and they can't do anything about it. So that's an example of planning, but also not really properly executing. This is why I'm not naming any names. I think we can learn from those two experiences, right? So our plan is going to be, this is what we've done for this year to make everything we do valuable. We have found all the savings. We have asked everybody to sacrifice that we can. This is our 5-year plan, and this will get us there. And I think that's the message going into the fall. And I agree, the town side is difficult. And every district is going through this right now. We're not alone. But I think if we do it that way, we'll have a better chance of success. Also, if we collaborate, right? We need to collaborate with the teachers to get communications out there. We need to collaborate with the unions throughout the town. It's going to take the whole village. We've got to, and again, all the enthusiasm we need to get this through. So that's the plan that I kind of see in front of us. On the debt side, I think there's a lot of, I'd like to delay making any decisions on all that as much as possible. I know we're kind of on the rails here, but I don't want us to be in a position where we lose what we need today because there's some confusion about what's around the corner. I don't know how to do that, but I'm just cautioning us to try to be clear about what we need today versus what we need tomorrow. I had something else, but I forgot about it, but thank you again for another great presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Squattrito?
I did have a quick question. So as we've kind of narrowed the range of increase, I know we've kind of knocked out the 5 to 6% range. Does that mean we've also maybe knocked out the 1 to 2% range?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So disappointing, but also somewhat encouraging if that's possible.
Yes.
So I don't know, this is repetitive, but it is a challenge in a lot of ways. On the note of professional development being something that is important, the Saturday before the storm, I went to charting the course, and it was free, and we got free food, which was great. But I learned a lot, even just from sitting there for 6 to 8 hours, and just as you mentioned, being in front of students 90% of the time, that is not something that teachers have the opportunity to do, even just to collaborate with other teachers. For the whole year, you might never have the same free period as another teacher. So, those those opportunities really do matter. And ultimately, the large point is, I don't, as Mr. Evans pointed out, I don't want to be catastrophic, but as we look at these cuts, the phrase that came to mind was, we are not playing games anymore. And I went and I looked at the FY26 presentation and looked at a very similar slide listing how we're going to come up with, the number here is 1.2 million. And we were pulling the levers of athletic fees, parking fees, moving the buses into the student parking lot. And we're not talking about the same thing anymore. We're talking about making substantial changes to the district. And I've seen the message you put out in the newsletter, and I think there is some awareness of this in the community, but I'm not sure that the gravity of it is fully understood. And it's I don't know what adjective to use. It's really difficult, and it's really scary, as I said last time. But putting the number 15 to 20 FTEs, as you've said multiple times, that's not 15 to 20 individuals, that's more than 15 to 20 individuals. And we're at a point, and I know we said this last meeting, where this is going to have a substantial impact. It just is. And perhaps I am naive, but I don't think that is something that the community wants. And I don't think that's where we are. Like the number at the last meeting that came up from Ms. Chu, the gap was, around $400 per household. Again, maybe I'm naive, and as somebody who does not pay property taxes in Cohasset, I would proceed with extreme caution on this. But from a high level perspective, it's hard for me to say that that is not something that I feel that this community is against, or that we could get them behind. And, as Mr. Evans pointed out, I looked at overrides and challenges other districts are facing. I think if it's something we were to move forward with, whether now or in the fall, coming up with something that is extremely targeted, limited to 3 bullet points on the impact of it and what it's asking for, would be really powerful. Like free full day kindergarten, prevent staff cuts, and a third thing, which, just be really important. But it's hard because we need to keep this district, regardless of building projects in the future, maintaining what it's doing. And we've seen the presentation from Mr. Scott and Mr. Ford and Mr. Scapoletti earlier, seeing what a great trajectory we're on and the real impact we are having on the district, and the culture that is changing, that I started to witness as I was leaving the district, that things are changing, things are on the uptrend, and that is about to change, and we have to make a decision. So, I understand the caution around an override, and I don't think it is something everybody should immediately jump to anytime that there are challenges. It's not something we jumped to not me, but it's not something the committee jumped to last year when there were challenges and we weren't going to meet the increases. We addressed issues, we cut around the edges, but we're at a point where that's not possible anymore. So I just want to point out again, what I see as the significant impact that this will have, while also emphasizing that I believe there potentially are options that need to be looked at, or at the very least discussed. Like, I feel we have discussions about these, but I think perhaps we're at a point where those need to be expanded.
Thank you. Mr. McClellan.
Madam Chair. I want to, like, I guess, in last meeting, obviously, I made it clear how concerned I am about the circumstance. One of my major concerns is the elimination or reduction of any student-facing positions. I'm very protective of the, the talent that we have here at the district, and, maybe left in a situation where we have no choice but to reduce some positions that otherwise we would never reduce. That said, I think that there are some like slight silver linings to these situations, because it does force us to very, very closely evaluate where some savings do make sense. And also people should understand that sometimes, naturally occurring vacancies, maybe a staff member's retiring or something, and then another staff member that is in a position to fill that vacancy. And so we're reducing without losing anyone. So there are those situations, and the superintendent is, and our assistant superintendent and all building leaders are all collaborating on those sort of situations, so that we can minimize the amount of actual reductions, like hard reductions, like loss of assets that we have. Also you have to look at it in terms of FTEs, not just people, which I think Superintendent Shannon has pointed out in the past, right? So like, there could be someone that's full-time and that's a 1.0 FTE. There could be someone that maybe is a 1.0 FTE right now, but maybe could be a 0.8 FTE or something when we reevaluate the need as to what they're doing. So there's savings there, for each 1/10 of a point. So it forces us. That's a healthy thing to do. However, I agree with everything Mr. Squattrito just said. I think that maybe we should collaborate on ways beyond the school committee meeting and beyond the superintendent's newsletter to just basically broadcast, how serious our situation is, and just maybe brainstorm ideas that maybe people are. I will note that Ms. Chu's calculation that you had noted that, I applauded last time, because I was, I'm excited at the prospect of, sort of, it takes a village to, contribute to this. And I just, obviously, I've spent countless hours towards our school district, and I feel very strongly about it. I think it's the epicenter of our community, but not everyone necessarily feels that way. That figure is based on, I think, like the entire community, not just the school community, who may feel even more, they may feel strongest out of anyone about the operational budget of the schools. So obviously the ask would be much bigger from the number of households that are actually directly impacted by the schools, which is, I don't know, if we have 1,400 students and you think, maybe an average of 2.5 kids per household, I don't know, maybe it's just like, 500 households or something like that. So the number would be much larger, I think, to get a much smaller overall figure. But it's something that, maybe, we figure out and collaborate on once we get the hard numbers as to what we're looking at for reductions, and, what the amount is we might be able to see from families, and maybe there's no appetite for it from folks, and it's a public school district, right? This isn't a private school. So, people might not have any appetite to contribute any additional funds to it. But as Mr. Squattrito pointed out, as I said last time, it will absolutely impact, what we're able to deliver. As Superintendent Shannon pointed out, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we're still delivering the quality education that we currently deliver. But, there will be limits if we're having to make reductions. You're going to have less resources. So that's all I would like to add at this phase. I think there's a lot more to look at, and I think the next presentation will be a fairly difficult one to dig into.
Thank you. And I will, lots of thoughts. But I think too, I'm thinking about, there is impact, and I'm thinking about the communications right now, and the earlier calls for people to, the general public to be engaged and aware and educated on this. And I think that your beautiful work, Dr. Shannon, has been broadcast. But the time for public engagement and problem solving is right now. It is right now. It is not when we're taking the vote on the budget in March. It is right now. It is being engaged, whether you're here, whether you're online right now or watch this as you're going to bed tonight or tomorrow morning while you're folding laundry, or listen to it in the car, or read through the presentations that are available to everyone in this community to really understand and better understand, because I think the administration has done a lot of work to answer questions that we've heard from the community about how we might solve these problems, how we are going through our process, and we are trying to be as transparent as possible. And the time for questions, engagement, and ideas is really right now. So I encourage everyone to sort of take this as a sense of urgency to engage in this moment. And then I will also continue to draw that connection between our earlier presentation around the role in which schools, and specifically the grown-ups who work in schools, can save children's lives by being the wonderful people that they are. And that is not hyperbole, that is the truth. That our teachers, our educators, our custodial staff, our bus drivers, our secretarial staff interact with our community's children every single day, and know it or not, they sometimes are that link for that child that allows them to get through the next day, to get through the day after that, to continue to learn, to continue to be a productive and loved member of our community. And so that in and of itself has no value at all. It is priceless, or it is without being able to put a number on it, but that's what we're talking about. And I think it is serious, it is urgent, and requires public engagement. So I hope that any of you who are listening, pass on those words to your friends at the bus stop, when you meet for coffee at Seabird, or wherever you're doing yoga and stretching, to say, hey, tune into this, and that we can start spreading that word.
Can I just add, if this time isn't convenient for people, there are people who have been calling, emailing, coming to meet with me. That's part of my job. I encourage people, if you have ideas or you have questions, please come talk to me, because I think that is enormously valuable if this time doesn't work for folks.
Thank you. And I know you mean it too. And I think I will just speak as a parent that sometimes I am reluctant to bother very busy people who have things, but that we really do want all of us collectively. I think, and I'll speak for school committee members as well, please reach out to us, as well as the administration. We want to hear from you and engage in collaborative problem solving. So. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Yes, Ms. Latanzi.
Ms. Latanzi, 125 Dome Street. I want to thank you guys for all your comments, thoughts.
Mind coming up just so,
Oh,
because the
sorry.
light sometimes doesn't,
Yeah.
it drops people off like a cliff over here.
As I throw
So.
things at everybody.
My apologies.
I can't see the screen, so I'm over here
That's fine.
staring at my presentation. So I don't even know where to start, but I think in summary, I want to start with saying, I don't know if people have children at Osgood, but Principal Gaudette sent out the school's report card today. And it's a tool for everyone to utilize to look at how we're doing as a school. Not only student achievement, but teacher qualifications and student learning opportunities. And that got me to a place that I love to go to, is the DESE website. And based on those metrics that we showed in this report card, I thought I'd look at how Cohasset compares to others in the district. And I think this comes back to the spending, and I just really want to point this out because I think it hits home. I know there's conversation here about, not everybody in our town has kids in public school here. So, do they care? But these numbers, I mean, it speaks to what Superintendent Shannon was saying, is that teachers make do with not a lot. And we are doing an amazing job. So I'll just leave these rankings with you. So Cohasset ranks 129th out of 397 districts in spending per pupil. So, I mean, we're not spending crazy, but we're, not at the bottom either. And we're 130th out of 397 in average teacher pay. And we're 274th out of 397 in number of teachers per student. So with 397 being the low end, I mean, we're already at a lower number of teachers per student in that ratio, yet we still continue to outperform academically. We ranked third in the district in 10th grade English, 46th in math. So even with our underfunding right now, today, we are a unique school district. And that's a testament to our community and something that I think everyone in our community, whether you have a kid in our school system, should be cognizant of and proud of. And I know we're kind of tiptoeing around this whole conversation about an override and its urgency. I totally agree. It's super urgent. But what do we do with that? Like, even if we do get the community to come here and say, tell me more, Superintendent Shannon, I want to talk to you. What does this mean? We can talk about it, but what is our tactical next step? Can we push for an override? Can we push out annual town meeting and do something collaboratively with the town? Because I think if we get the town, who's also in dire straits, a place for an override within that in a strategic way with longevity, a smart plan for the future, as Mr. Evans thinks we need, which I 100% agree with. How do we do that now? So we don't lay off 25 FTE, whether they're, you know, the back end of our strong personnel in schools, or if they're student facing. Why should we lose them this year only to bring them back next year? Maybe. Can we? They'll be gone. They'll get to go to someplace else. And those are the people that make Cohasset school system what it is. Those numbers, they mean something. So is there any skin in the game in that spirit of urgency to do something for this upcoming fiscal year in a meaningful way? And I'd love to hear you guys' thought on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Procedurally, there's nothing this committee can vote on to make that happen, get into a town meeting. There's a carve out in the law which says only the select board can put this on. The citizens can do a lot of things, but an override vote can only be done by the select board. Like, so that is literally, we can jump and scream. My response is still, I'm looking at the long term of all this. And my feeling is we can't fail. Like that's my number one thing is if we fail forever. If we succeed, you know, for the next 5 years and we fight again. So for me, I think right now, I like what we're doing. I still think we're playing small ball. They're going to hurt, but it also gives us narrative. It gives us ammunition to say we've done this already. It gives us time to at town meeting say we are doing everything we can, and now it is time for everyone else to step up. And one number which I wanted to mention is we have 3,000 households. So if you want to do your $300,000, you divide by 3. Just use your 3,000. It's 3,100, and obviously you got median house size, whatever, but it's 3,000. So you can just guess, you know, if we need, you know, $3 million, right? Just do the math, right? That's per household. That's what we're asking for. And I think that starting last week, starting today, with the enthusiasm brought from parents, I think that's how we get the critical mass to get something big. I'd rather go for something that is big and gets us 5 years than I'd rather spend time developing a plan than, especially if we don't have allies. We don't have allies, select board advisory. You know, obviously I take every dollar we can get. I'm just thinking of politics here. I've been doing politics in this town for a long time. So I'm looking at the political landscape and how to get this done. And I think we're on the right track now. I'm confident that we can get it done, staying focused the way we are. That's my response.
Ms. Latanzi, I'll just add my personal perspective. You asked is there skin in the game, so we'll get it done. We did this last year. I mean, I hated the fee increases. I hate the idea of cutting into the bone even more. I have looked at these budget numbers a lot. I'm working with the superintendent. We're talking to various stakeholders. I mean, the hard issue is it's math. And it's income, it's expense. We've had a lot of expenses that have increased that were outside of our control, transportation, special education, and energy. And you have to have those. So we are trying to figure out, and if you do the math right there, that the staffing is 80% of our expenses. I think the proposal, if I did the math quickly, we're only going to try and get cuts 50 to 60% of the reductions will come from staff, as opposed to, it could be 80 if it was pro rata. So we're pushing down on that. And it pains me to think that there are people who have entrusted us with their career that we can't continue to keep. So the question is, can we do something now? And there's a part of me that says, yeah, we should absolutely do something now. We should rush and get something done. But what we risk there is getting something that is a half measure that doesn't fully address our district's concerns. And even if we get it, we come back in 3 years for more, or with less trust from the community. A better approach, in my view, given where we are, is to look at where we're doing, figure out what we learned from this, as Mr. Cullen suggested, and figure out what an actual 5, 7, 10-year needs plan is, and solve this problem permanently. And we've been saying that we've been trying to do. We've been identifying budget issues. We identified them last year. We're identifying them now. We've pulled all the tricks that we can out of the hat. And so we now know we can go confidently to the town and say, here's our plan, here's our needs. We have done everything we could do. This is if you want to have performing schools, this is what we need. And I think that gives us the highest chance of permanent success. Because I don't want partial success. I don't want half-funded success, and then we just extend we kick the can down the road and then have to do reductions in 3 years instead of now. That's not a win. So that's what I'm worried about. That's why I say we don't do it now. We figure out exactly what we need. We get the time to get it right.
Can I just ask a clarifying question on that? So you say we need the time to get it right. What will we know next year that we don't know now for our needs?
Number of retirements. We know changes in demographics on our teachers. There's a lot of floating variables in the current budget that we don't know yet. So we don't even have a full accurate number of what the deficit is. We have not done, to my knowledge, at least at the school committee level, an impact analysis of where we can comfortably reduce and where we can't. We don't know what our strategic service offering plans should be in light of a further budget. There's lots of questions that we haven't even solved for this budget, much less a 5-year projection. So we solve this budget, then we work on a 5-year projection moving for the fall, where we have then a very cogent and clear proposal for the select board and the town.
And this
Yeah, we
is
also
beyond
have the-
staffing, right? I just want to clarify. It's not just the staffing post piece of it. You just mentioned retirement. I was just clarifying.
I'm thinking the budget as a whole.
Okay.
We also we're currently negotiating with teachers for their contract. And that, again, 80% of the budget. So how that goes, and again, I mentioned before, like, this is a puzzle, and everyone is going to have to put a piece in, and the teachers have a big say in that, right? Because they are 80% of things. And as we saw, 0.5% or 1% is lots of people. So, you know, there are small numbers that end up to big FTEs. So how that outcome happens, and again, that's a large conversation, also determines our trajectory. And we're not going to have that, you know, that's going to have to be built into whatever override we have, and we don't have that yet. We just don't know how much it is.
Mr. McClellan.
I just want to be responsive because I think Ms. Tandy posed, part of the question was, that she posed was, you know, would we consider pushing out annual town meetings so that gives us more time to sort of fully bake these ideas? The issue is, I don't know exactly when town meeting is.
If they already said it.
That's fine, even if they already said it, right? Because it hasn't happened yet, so you can always, but the issue is, like last year's, it's usually mid-May, like, right?
Yeah.
So but at that meeting, we got to pass the budget.
We do.
So you're only, and the fiscal year ends and begins, at the end of June, for
We
speaking of
would still have
July.
to do this budget.
So it doesn't give you a tremendous amount of time. You don't really have too much of a cushion there anyway, in terms of passing the budget for the next fiscal year. So there's not really much room to work with. And then there's the question of, well, can we, and I think Mr. Dial pretty much addressed this, but I just add this one additional thought, is that it's not only, to me, if we're gonna do an override, right, there's an override where just the schools would be asking for that. We're like, hey, we'd like an override of such, so much money for the schools. And there will be people that are opposed to that because they don't want to just give money to the schools because it's just impacting one subset. And you may really make a really compelling case for the community to coalesce behind the schools because of the data you shared and our success that we're having in the district. I do, however, feel that a lot of departments have come to a head, as Superintendent Shannon pointed out during our presentation, at the same time. And we stand a much greater likelihood of success by allowing every department to put together a comprehensive package in terms of their ask and combine that into a global override that then every citizen should pretty much support, because whether they're a big fan of public safety or they're a big fan of water and sewer or whatever their energy is dedicated towards, right, or schools, right, then everyone has a dog in that fight, so to speak. So I think we have a stand a greater chance to get that passed. And I don't see that happening in, whatever it would be, 10 weeks or something that we have until, town meeting, or 12 weeks or whatever. So I think it stands to reason that we would have to wait till next year to do a well-conceived override, in my opinion. Even though I am usually a really impatient person and just want to get to the solve, and I get frustrated about how slow municipal government moves. I just think that that's probably the prudent approach, as Mr. Dial put it. But
we're also not waiting till next year. We're waiting till this fall.
Right.
For FY28. So it's like when we say next year, if the vote is not.
Next cycle, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah,
next
exactly.
ATM.
Well, we're already shortening the time.
And that's exactly, but that's what I'm talking about. And so that's why I suggest maybe there are some acute solutions where we sort of, I don't know what this would look like, and I hesitate to even say anything, but we look to the actual school community itself, or maybe some sort of contributions in some way to avoid, I don't think we're going to be able to find $1.2 million from the school families, but we may find enough to reduce, like we did last year, minimize the actual student facing reductions, which, and again, this has not been discussed. This is just some crazy idea I have, which my wife says I have too many of. So, but I'm just, that's sort of where I think we stand the best chance of finding some sort of like additional tax base this cycle. But I just wanted to address, because you had talked about the timing of it, and I just wanted to address, or give my personal thoughts on it, because you asked for a response to that. So.
And outside of Jake, we all have kids, right? So like I look at reductions in future years. I've got a son and a daughter that are going to be in those years, right? So I mean, my skin in the game is literally the number of the teachers that my kids are going to see. So I don't want anyone. I am somebody who is very analytical and very cerebral, but I don't want that to take away from the fact that I am passionate, and this does impact me directly. It impacts my kids directly, and I don't take it lightly. So I hope that everyone listens when I say things that are mathematical. It's not because I don't feel emotions. It's that's how my brain works. But that's my skin. My skin is that I have kids in this district and I live here, and that will always be the case.
Thank you, everyone. We do not have any comments online. Do we have any additional thoughts or comments?
I would just say very quickly, Stephanie Saunders, 10 Stratford Terrace. I think this is all great. I think what it kind of felt like last year, just in this Groundhog's Day again, is that this kind of big catastrophic thing happens, right? And, life really has to go on. We have to figure things out. It kind of falls off. Then it comes up again. So I think for me, it's like, how do we keep the momentum going very strategically and clear? And like, not just at these school committee meetings. I don't know how many people are online, but I know it's not all the people that need to know this. So if there's thoughts from you guys about how to like actually do that community engagement in some way that isn't just the one-off conversations. And I really appreciate all the messaging from Dr. Shannon, but I feel like that needs to be like all around, like a very strategic plan with that into the fall.
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
otherwise it's, there is so many priorities. I mean, we're not gonna open up the public safety can of worms here, but like, there's a lot of other priorities going on. So how do we keep this at the forefront of people's minds? And the conversations I have with people of all ages, really, truly, I will support what Victoria said. People really do want to see the school succeed all around. I worked with the elderly in town. They're very proud of their kids going here. They want to see that going. So I think there is a really good amount of support behind it. That like communication strategy would be really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Education is the perpetuation of democracy as well. So I always like to remind everyone of that. Democracy does not exist without an educated populace. So let's move on to community relations and communications. At this point, if there are any reports from school committees, subcommittees, or liaisons, please report.
This isn't a really a report, but I don't know where else it fits in.
Sure.
We conducted our first office hours upon request from the families today. So I just want to remind everyone, we didn't do a great job messaging that ahead of time because it wasn't until it wasn't. We discussed it and voted on it before the winter recess.
Yes.
So it would have been, I think, a better idea. I just got too busy and forgot to ask Superintendent Shannon to do that. But we are starting to do that where before every meeting, we will meet. Someone will be here an hour before the meeting for you to come in if you want to share your thoughts, with the exception of that March 18th meeting, which is already an hour.
Extra anyway.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. McClellan.
Hey, also if it's okay with the communication subcommittee, I wouldn't mind to Sandra's point, sitting down and just looking at how we send our emails out. I do think that as we are sending out like the link to the committee, to the next school committee meeting, which is a link, that's not very engaging, right? So if we say like the school committee is going to discuss the budget shortfall for next year, like that's what the email is. We'll get a lot of people, right? I mean, we have to start. I think that we lose a lot of people. It's like old newspapers below the fold. If something's after a click, you have to sell people on that click. So we have to start making what we're selling people more attractive to click on. And I think there's a lot of places we can improve that. That's okay with this.
I think I am on that committee, and I think actually you might be on that committee as well, potentially.
then-
So let's set a meeting with Dr.
Absolutely.
Shannon and get going.
Let's go. Okay.
I'm gonna ask Jennifer to review who's on the subcommittee
Okay.
and we'll set something up and
Okay,
let's do it.
Build a plan, exactly, yeah.
Excellent. Any other comments on that? In that block? Great. There are no topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair this evening. We have no minutes to approve and no reason to go into executive session. So at this point, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So
A second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Mr. Dial?
Aye.
Mr. Evans?
Aye.
Mr. Splatria? Mr. McClellan?
Aye.
Jen Leskey, aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you to our in-person participants, our online participants. Again, this is a good time. Please continue to join us. Thank you.